Hi, this is Diane
And this is Denise,
of the History Ghost Bump podcast.
where we talk about haunted history.
And you're listening to the Dirty Bits podcast.
It's so naughty.
Hi, I'm Tawny Plattis, and you're listening to Dirty Bits, the show that covers the sexy, scandalous, and salacious stories from history your teacher probably left out. Firstly, Mike Cosgrove, you are so welcome for that James Joyce episode, my friend. We try our very best to read and respond to each and every review, email, and comment. Our love bugs are the absolute best, and we positively adore you. This week, Roxy Zeev left us an amazing review on iTunes saying, "So cute. Girl, I am a true crime podcast lover through and through, and it really takes a lot for me to step outside my comfort zone. But you are so fun, so cute, and so charming on social media that I can't help myself. I am binging all of your episodes, and I'm just in love with your style and your humor. And you really have what it takes to get people to try a little something different, and I'm so glad I did. I'm completely hooked, and I totally admire everything you've done with your show. As much as I like the show, I will have to admit that I think I almost love interacting with you guys on your social media more. LOL. Bravo." And then she gave us 3 little hearts, and we just exploded in love over here. Thank you so much for that review. It gave me the biggest smile, and it totally made my week. Be sure to join us on social media, where we'll be doing giveaways of exciting new merchandise this week and every week after. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/dirtybitspodcast and in our Facebook discussion group, the Dirty Bits Podcast Group, where we post art history memes and talk all things historically filthy. You can also connect with us on Instagram at Dirty Bits Podcast and Twitter at the Dirty Bits Pod. If you feel the need, you can leave us a review on Facebook or iTunes. We love talking with our listeners and would be delighted if you joined in with us. You might even get a shout out on our next episode. All of our links are available in the show notes here and on our website, tawnyvoice.com/dirtybits. We'd also like to welcome our first pod sister to the Orbital Jigsaw Network. California Dreaming is a true crime show that is just to die for. Check it out, along with some other fun shows, at orbitaljigsaw.com. Many of you have requested longer, bigger, more frequent episodes. We would absolutely love to bring the show to you full-time. And if that's something you would like to see, you can help us work towards making that a reality by visiting us at patreon.com/dirtybits and becoming an official Dirty Birdie. Every donation helps us achieve our goal of bringing more to the show, like animation, merchandise, and the ability to satisfy your every craving. A giant thank you to our newest Dirty Birdies who have donated on Patreon. We are seriously overwhelmed by your generosity and are so excited to start sending you all of the patron-only goodies we've been storing up. For example, this week, our patrons at the $10 level and higher will be receiving a very special segment where I read all, yes, all, of the dirty bits of James Joyce's letters that were too dirty for the podcast. Every one of your contributions to the show means so much, especially to those who aren't able to donate. And George and I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. Enjoy the show. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Genevan philosopher, writer, and composer of the 18th century, one of the main players behind the Enlightenment in not only France, but all across Europe. He also heavily influenced the French Revolution and is largely credited with the development of modern political and educational thought. But this is the Dirty Bits, so we're more interested in the fact that he loved being spanked and had kind of a thing for the whole mommy-son deal in bed. Rousseau was born in Geneva on June 28, 1712, which was a city-state of the Swiss Confederacy at the time. The city was run, in theory, by all its male voting citizens. Thing is, the citizens were a minority when compared to the immigrants, or inhabitants as they were called, and their descendants, who were called natives. So in actuality, the city was ruled by a small number of rich families that were called the Council of 200, and they delegated all their power to 25 people called the Little Council. So in the early 18th century, there's all this debate over the sovereignty of the people, and they're like, this ruling oligarchy is a fucking joke, man. And Pierre Fatio, a democratic reformer, says a sovereign that never performs an act of sovereignty is an imaginary being. So the Little Council shoots him. And Rousseau was like really proud of this and repped his hometown his entire life, signing his books Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Citizen of Geneva. His father was in the family business, being a watchmaker, something Rousseau was also very proud of, writing, "A Genevan watchmaker is a man who can be introduced anywhere. A Parisian watchmaker is only fit to talk about watches." His mother, Suzanne, died of puerperal fever only 9 days after he was born. He and his older brother, Francois, were partially raised by their father and aunt, who was also named Suzanne. At the age of 10, Rousseau's dad experiences some legal trouble, so he dips, taking Suzanne and leaving the kids, 'cause priorities. The boys didn't see much of their father after that, and were left in the care of their mother's brother, a Calvinist preacher, who ships them off to another Calvinist minister named Monsieur Lembercier. Nearly all of the information during these years comes from Rousseau's autobiography, Confessions, which just blatantly rips off the title of St. Augustine's own autobiographical work and inspires the names of landmark films involving shopaholics, drama queens, sociopaths, and go-go girls. Rousseau's Confessions was one of the first major autobiographies ever written and covers the first 53 years of his life. It was published after his death, though he did read excerpts aloud when hanging out with his friends. This was a big thing because the two previous autobiographies that had been produced were, as I mentioned, St. Augustine's Confessions, and those were focused on the writer's religious experiences. Now Rousseau, he got down and dirty. It was incredibly unique at the time, and he knew it, opening the book by saying, "I have resolved on an enterprise which has no precedent and which, once complete, will have no imitator. My purpose is to display to my kind a portrait in every way true to nature, and the man I shall portray will be myself." And then everyone copied him, from Wordsworth to De Quincey, and Rousseau was like, I did it before it was cool. His autobiography is a bit controversial because of the inaccuracies like dates being off, out of order, misrepresented, incomplete, or incorrect, according to historian Paul Johnson. However, several scholars have also reached conclusions that in general are in favor of Rousseau. In his book, good old Jean-Jacques remembers living with the minister and his daughter, Mademoiselle Lembercier, who took on a maternal role. He says, "The life which I led at Bossé suited me so well that had it only lasted longer, it would have completely decided my character. Tender, affectionate, and gentle feelings formed its foundation. I shall never forget how, if I happened to hesitate when saying my catechism in church, nothing troubled me more than to observe signs of restless and dissatisfaction on Mademoiselle Lembercier's face. That alone troubled me more than the disgrace of failing in public, which, nevertheless, affected me greatly. And I may say here that the thought of Mademoiselle's reproaches caused me less uneasiness than the fear of offending her." So from what I gather, she loved the boys as a mother and wasn't cruel. She punished them when they misbehaved, and it was consistent with what was typical disciplinary action at the time. At first, Mademoiselle would simply threaten punishment, which was something the young Jean-Jacques Rousseau was unaccustomed to, and it scared the shit out of him. Like many children, the threats eventually stopped working. And he says when he finally was punished, "I found the reality less terrible than the expectation." She would spank them, and it kind of backfired on her. Rousseau says, "I had found in the pain, even in the disgrace, a mixture of sensuality, which had left me less afraid than desirous of experiencing it again from the same hand. No doubt some precocious sexual instinct was mingled with this feeling, for the same chastisement inflicted by her brother would not have seemed to me at all pleasant. And if I kept myself from deserving punishment, it was solely for fear of displeasing Mademoiselle, for so great is the power exercised over me by kindness, even by that which is due to the sense, that it has always controlled the latter in my heart." So even though he was attempting to be on his best behavior, he would, of course, being a kid, mess up again. So Mademoiselle goes, "Well, I guess the spanking isn't working. And frankly, it exhausts me anyway, so I'm going to call it quits." And Rousseau is realizing that he's really got a thing for being spanked, and he fights against his desire for more. He claims he kept himself free from every taint until the age when the coldest and most sluggish temperaments began to develop. "And during this time, I devoured with burning glances all the pretty women I met. My imagination unceasingly recalled them to me, only to make use of them in my own fashion, and to make of them so many Mademoiselles Lambercière." The fetish never left him, and he goes on to write, "This curious taste, always abiding with me, and carried to depravity, and even frenzy, preserved my morality, which it might naturally have been expected to destroy." He also said, "In my foolish fancies, in my erotic frenzies, in the extravagant acts to which they sometimes led me, I had recourse in my imagination to the assistance of the other sex, without ever thinking that it was serviceable for any purpose than that for which I was burning to make use of it. In this manner, then, in spite of an ardent, lascivious, and precocious temperament, I passed the age of puberty without desiring, even without knowing, of any other sensual pleasures than those of which Mademoiselle Lambercière had most innocently given me the idea." Rousseau claims that he was shy and didn't have much luck with the ladies. He wanted to ask to be spanked, but he was far too bashful, in his words, to ask anyone to do it. He writes, "To lie at the feet of an imperious mistress, to obey her commands, to ask her forgiveness, this was for me a sweet enjoyment. And the more my lively imagination heated my blood, the more I preserved the appearance of a bashful lover." So this guy is sexually frustrated as hell because fet life doesn't exist yet. So what he does, according to his autobiography, now first I must mention, the obscene object he refers to as his penis. The ridiculous object he refers to is his bare naked ass. So this is what he does. "I haunted dark alleys and hidden retreats where I might be able to expose myself to women in the condition in which I should have liked to be in their company. What they saw was not an obscene object. I never even thought of such a thing. It was a ridiculous object. The foolish pleasure I took in displaying it before their eyes cannot be described. There was only one step further necessary for me to take in order to gain actual experience of the treatment I desired, and I have no doubt that someone would have been bold enough to afford me the amusement while passing by, if I had had the boldness to wait." So he gets himself all situated in this dark alley-type area that leads to some cellars that's near a well where girls would go to fetch water. He had surveyed the area beforehand and had found there was no outlet from the cellars, so he was screwed if he had to make a quick getaway, but he's like, cost of doing business, worth it, I'll just hide somewhere if need be. So he's getting all pumped and he's psyching himself out as the girls approach, and he says he exhibited to the girls a sight more laughable than seductive. The more modest pretended to see nothing. Others began to laugh. Others felt insulted and made a noise. The foolish pleasure I took in displaying it before their eyes cannot be described. So after he mooned them, he runs off towards those cellars, but he's being chased by a tall, mustachioed hero with this giant sword. There's no outlet, if you remember, so Rousseau is like, oh shit, as the mustache man grabs his arm. And behind Mustache Man is an army of old women brandishing brooms and ready to kick the ass he was just so gleefully exposing. So Mustache Man goes, "What in the holy hell is wrong with you, bro? What the fuck are you up to? What is this all about?" And Rousseau, like a total douchebag, says, "I said that I was a young stranger of good birth, whose brain was affected, that I had run away from home because they wanted to shut me up, that I was lost if he betrayed me, but that, if he would let me go, I might someday be able to reward his kindness." Contrary to all expectation, my words and demeanor took effect. The terrible man was touched, and after administering a short reproof, he let me go. A few days later, Rousseau is strutting down the street and he sees the mustachioed man. He writes, "He recognized me, and imitating me mockingly said, 'I am a prince, and I'm a coward, but don't let his highness come back again.' He said no more, and I sneaked away, not venturing to look up. I judged that the confounded old women had made him ashamed of his credulity. The adventure, without having the consequences which I dreaded, nevertheless made me careful for a long time." So he eases up on flashing people for a bit. But he still has needs and a fetish he's looking to satisfy. That's when he meets the woman he would call the greatest love of his life, the infamous Louise Delannoy de Warens, on Palm Sunday in 1728. De Warens comes from this ancient, noble family and had married her husband when she was fairly young. Their marriage wasn't pleasant, and Louise goes, "I'm out of here," annuls their marriage and becomes a professional proselytizer. So the king actually pays her to bring Protestants to Catholicism. She loved to spend those dollar bills, party, listen to music, and had a large library. She also had a circle of friends who were all educated members of the Catholic clergy, and they introduced Rousseau to letters and ideas. Rousseau had always been meh about his studies, but in his 20s his interest was sparked, and he immersed himself studying philosophy, math, and music. Rousseau says de Warens had a face full of charm, beautiful blue eyes full of gentleness, a dazzling complexion, the outlines of an enchanting throat. He's 21 when the wealthy 28-year-old becomes his benefactress and main squeeze. She called him Little One, and he called her Mama. De Warens was also shacking up with the steward of her household, Claudinette, and he was terribly offended when his mistress took on a new lover. He died of pleurisy in 1734, and allegedly never got over her betrayal, as he saw it. De Warens wasted no time in replacing her side bitch, and as Rousseau says, she found a substitute in the person of another new consort, a young Vince Reed, wishing to attach him to her service, employed all means which she thought proper. Which means Rousseau participated in the ménage à trois arranged by his mama, but was confused and uncomfortable with the whole thing. By age 25, he was given a small inheritance from his mother's side, and used some of it to repay de Warens for all of her support. He then became secretary to the Comte de Montaigu, who was a French ambassador to Venice. The job paid shit, but it was an honorable position, which sounds an awful lot like what they tell you about internships. The Comte paid his staff irregularly, and Rousseau quit after 11 months, forever carrying an intense distrust of bureaucracy. He goes back to Paris and befriends Thérèse Levasseur, a seamstress who was the primary breadwinner in her family, comprised of her mother and numerous siblings. She was 24, and he was 33. Rousseau eventually moves Thérèse and her mother in with him. But before he did, Thérèse gave birth to as many of 5 of his children. Rousseau says in Confessions that he convinced her to give up each of the newborns at the hospital for the sake of her honor, since they weren't married. But he writes, "I trembled at the thought of entrusting them to a family ill brought up, to be still worse educated. The risk of the education of the foundling hospital was much less." He tried to find his son 10 years later, but there weren't any records that could be found. His practice of what many considered child abandonment was often brought up after he became a famous theorist of education and raising children. Rousseau went on to befriend philosophers and contributed numerous articles to Systematic Dictionary of the Sciences, Arts, and Crafts. which is most well known for representing the Enlightenment period. He also wrote both words and music of the opera, The Village Soothsayer, from which he was awarded a lifelong pension by the king. But Rousseau goes, "No, that's okay, I'm good." And his friends were like, "Dude, what the fuck is wrong with you?" And he was imaginatively called the man who had refused a king's pension, because it was a very creative time in France. He continued to stir the pot throughout his life, pissing off his friends in addition to powerful authority figures, as well as composing incredibly successful, though controversial novels, articles, and books. His own pastor publicly denounced him as the Antichrist, and the parishioners would throw rocks at him when he went out for walks. One evening around midnight, his house was pelted with stones, shattering some of the glass windows. When the local officer arrived, he went, "My God, it's a quarry!" Rousseau was then advised to leave town. So his friend, David Hume, who described Rousseau as gentle, modest, affectionate, disinterested, of extreme sensitivity, is like, "Come stay in Britain with me, bring Therese, it'll be a ball." So Rousseau goes to Britain and stays with Hume first. And James Boswell, the biographer, says, "Oh, I'll escort Therese to Britain. I'd be happy to." Which wouldn't have been a big deal, except Boswell had met Therese before and had sent her a lavish gift. He had also asked Rousseau permission to occasionally chat with her. And Hume hears about Boswell escorting Therese and goes, "I dread some event fatal to our friend's honor." Turns out he hit the nail on the head, because Therese and Boswell were not only together for a week, but Boswell wrote about them getting it on in his diary multiple times. But Therese goes, "Don't imagine you are a better lover than Rousseau." Rousseau then gets into this big fight with Hume, saying he wasn't defending him enough against critics and he was going through his mail. Hume actually straight up told Rousseau he was crazy and publicly wrote about their little tiff. Rousseau remained silent in the now public controversy and returned to France despite there being a warrant out for his arrest. He and Therese had a fakey wedding ceremony and went to live in a farmhouse where Rousseau completed his work, Confessions. He went on to produce numerous works before being bowled over by a carriage and a Great Dane in 1776. He is believed to have suffered a concussion and neurological damage. After this, his health rapidly declined, and he may have begun suffering from epileptic seizures. On the morning of July 1st, 1778, he suffered a stroke and died. Rumors were spread saying he had committed suicide or was insane. This is usually when I wrap up the show with something quippy. And while there are ample opportunities to make some kind of cheeky remark about Rousseau's ass, or his fetishes, Rousseau was so ready to analyze himself, I'll let him close the show in his own words. "I have never promised to introduce a great character to the public. I have promised to describe myself as I am. And in order to know me in my riper years, it is necessary to have known me well in my youth." Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or corrections, feel free to email us at tawny@tawnyvoice.com or let us know on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or on our website, tawnyvoice.com. See you next Tuesday.